We have turned the switch on. This is a space for conversations about leadership and decision making in the system that keeps the lights on. I'm Julieta with Electric Power Engineers, and I'll be your host. Today, I am joined by Herschel Arant, Chief Growth Officer at Rappahannock Electric Co-op. Herschel's at the forefront of one of the most important challenges in the industry today, managing rapid load growth, including large data centers, while ensuring reliability and affordability for the communities that the co-op serves. Herschel, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you.
So we'll start by hearing from you your role today and what your day-to-day looks like.
Oh, well, today, my responsibility at Rappahannock Electric is threefold. It is engaging with our special economic development projects. Uh, a subset of that group of customers, our data centers, which is a very large part of the lift for Rappahannock today, and power delivery infrastructure to serve those customers. So we are focused on making sure that large customers, especially those who are making very large investments in our territory, have a good experience in relation to energy. Their projects come online in a timely manner, and you used the word affordable earlier, that they have access to reliable and affordable energy to support the projects that are so meaningful to our territory.
Very good, thank you. So I always like to share that I got hooked on working on the grid when I realized it was one interconnected system being balanced second by second so that we all have power at all times, right? So that we can actually take it for granted as customers. And that when it clicked to me also that electricity is not optional. It's something that we all depend on every day, our society, and it comes with a tremendous responsibility. And you worked in the industry for many years, providing this service. When did you first realize the work you do has real consequences? That if we get it wrong, people would actually feel it.
So that's a very interesting question. I appreciate you asking me that. I had that realization very early in my career, actually, as an intern many years ago in the summer. I actually visited the home of an elderly lady who was having reliability issues at her home in rural Georgia. She actually lived in this home with no electricity. She experienced the rural electrification effort in rural Georgia in this home. She walked me through her house room by room and shared with me how her house was electrified room by room and the impact on her quality of life room by room in her home. So at a very young age, the concept and of the importance of reliable and affordable electricity and its impact on an individual's quality of life was really reinforced for me, and it set me on a path that I've taken for decades now to be an integral part of the industry in that regard.
Excellent, fascinating. And it was already almost fully electrified, the home?
It was at the time that I walked through, but she told me about the first light bulb. The first appliance was a washing machine for her clothes, and how many hours of her day, of her week was, recovered for her to do
Yeah,
other things as opposed to manually washing her clothes, for example.
that's right. Essential service.
That's
Very
right.
good. So now transitioning to the reality, what is harder about running this system that we're talking about, running the grid, than people might think? And especially now in the context of large loads growing so fast.
So scale, scale and speed are the two challenges, to use a couple of words, and I'll elaborate a little bit. The electric grid is a massive machine. It's been around in generally in the form we operate it for about 100 years, so it's very mature. Um, we have dealt with growth in our industry that was relatively small compared to the overall size of the grid for many, many years. So how we grow and operate and evolve incrementally is very well understood. When we start talking about growing at very large percentages, or even in the case of Rappahannock's system, in orders of magnitude, now we find new challenges that haven't surfaced in the past. So we have to think about a number of issues operational from the perspective of, is there enough energy at the time we flip the switch on the wall? That take it for granted concept that you mentioned earlier. How does that work? How does energy balance work? Are we developing delivery infrastructure to meet those needs? Can we support the ever-changing loads that our customers are bringing to bear? Once upon a time, data centers, for example, were thought of as a relatively constant load. They came online and then run at a very high level consistently. That paradigm is changing. Data centers are starting to evolve depending upon the application as an intermittent load. They're not constant. They change from time to time depending upon the customer's need that is being processed at a given data center. So the balancing of load with generation and ensuring that we can serve that load while not creating a negative impact for everyone else who's interconnected to the grid is becoming a very challenging discipline, and we're equipped to meet that challenge. It's like most every technical problem that we encounter in any industry. Once we understand it, we have tools that we can bring to bear in order to solve problems and then optimize so that again we're staying focused on reliability and affordability.
Yeah, that's great. I was going to ask you to elaborate, and I actually my question was going to be, where do the expectations from large loads not match the operational reality? But I think I'm going to switch it around because I've been thinking lately, and especially with large loads, they are ultimately the customer. So maybe the question should be flipped around, right? Where do the expectations from utilities meeting, right? If their large load might not match that reality. And so I think an example of that was expecting flat load.
That's
It
right.
is not the case, and we have to adapt.
So at the end of the day, a data center owner, operator, whether it's a co-location facility or a hyperscaler, answers to customers. So every data center has customers that at the end of the day are driving the compute load on that facility. So one of the paradigm shifts I think that the electric utility is working through is to realize that the counterparty on an energy contract to serve a data center doesn't always have perfect insight into the exact energy needs day by day, hour by hour for that facility. Um, Not only that, not only do they not have complete insight at that level, they may not know from year to year what type of computing load may be at a given facility. So to develop flexible solutions is one of the challenges that we're working through now. To become aware of that awareness first, and then to work with our new customers that are going to own and operate data centers in order to bring flexible solutions to bear is part of our new business paradigm that we're working through. It's all new. So the industry is coming to grips with this. It's certainly not a mature thing that we understand today. and we're figuring it out together. It's creating a new level of collaboration between the customer and the utility in order to find those good solutions.
That's a great example. And flexibility, right? It is the word of the day. It had already started to become very important before large loads, right? We had already um, more variable renewable energy on the bulk
Mhm.
system. Then at the grid edge, we had realized that we needed flexibility to adapt to all of the new technologies the customers were adopting. And now I think large loads had just make it apparent, right? That the solutions have to absolutely be flexible, adaptable. We cannot commit just to something that's designed today. It has to be something that allows us to operate the system in a more flexible way.
That's right. Flexibility is a hallmark of our thinking going forward. Uh, the grid today is operated with less margin for error, I'll call it, than it has been in decades. And that's in relation to both generation capacity and power delivery network capacity. We do not have the margin, reserve margins, or the and I'll call reserve margin. I'll give that another term. I'll call it a margin for error that we had 50 years ago, when much of our bulk grid was developed and built out. So we have to be far more precise. Um, we have to be flexible. It would be nice to have a better understanding of what is going to happen in terms of both generation and load. But at the same time, we know unexpected things will happen. So we have to be better prepared than ever in order to react very quickly in order to maintain stability, reliability, and then do that in a way that doesn't take on unnecessary cost, because at the end of the day, the customer is going to bear that cost. And we just have to bring better solutions to bear.
Yeah, that's great. And I like your term margin for error. One that I have is one of my favorite terms in the industry. And it sort of speaks to how we have been um, planning and operating the system. We were able to do it that way. But one of my favorite terms is wiggle room, right? And
Yes.
you hear this, the operations, even at the distribution level, but also at the bulk level, we used to have more wiggle room because we were able to plan. Planning had some assumptions that then operations could play with. And now we're operating the system tighter and tighter. And there's that loss of wiggle room that was sort of a principle of
It,
why we had that reliability of the system.
and it, I like to use a personal finance metaphor to help the layperson understand. If I am spending half of my income in my household budget, I have a large margin for error. If my air conditioner breaks or my car breaks down, I can absorb an unexpected expenditure. But if I'm spending 90 or 95% of my income every week or month, and then something unexpected happens, now things, may be a little more difficult to absorb and understand. And that's what we've done with the grid. We, especially with power delivery infrastructure, we are using our infrastructure much more. I'm going to use the word effectively. We don't have as much idle capacity as we had. So, from an economic perspective, from a pure economic perspective, we are using our infrastructure far more effectively than we ever have. But from the system operator's perspective and from the reliability engineering perspective, we have less margin for error. So now, when we have an unexpected occurrence, um, maybe a load that is a little bigger than what we expected, or maybe a generator that's not available when we thought. Now we have to be a little more precise in terms of how we're using the network. Another good example that comes to mind is on the transmission network. We were able 10 years ago to accommodate intermittent resources like solar much more effectively than we are today. Now that we are running the transmission network at a much higher utilization factor during shoulder seasons, the spring and fall in the southeast, for example, when we generally will have outages to work on transmission lines to do routine maintenance, that's when solar facilities are generally operating at their maximum capacity and efficiency. So now we have a mismatch. We have a transmission network that's loaded more heavily than it ever has been before. We need to take a key element out to do maintenance, which is critical to maintaining reliability, but we have a generation resource that we really are interested in having operate at maximum output that might be limited because we don't have the power delivery capacity to accommodate it. So it's a real balancing act, and the better information we can have today situationally, the better we can operate, the better we can understand our generation and load challenges as far out into the future as possible, the better we can plan and be prepared for these challenges. So it's uh it's a far more complicated puzzle to put together than when I started my career 30 years ago.
Definitely. And it sounds like you mentioned the importance of flexibility to be able to respond, but it's the second time I hear you also emphasize predictability, forecasting, visibility as key,
It
right? Modernization, I think, and path forward for the grid, essential today.
it is. I learned very early in my career, if we want to have a smooth path to a desired outcome, we have to clearly know where we are. We have to be able to observe the state of the system clearly. And then we have to have some control over that system so we can now move it from where we are to where we want to be. That's a very basic concept, but it applies to long-term planning and improvement, and it applies to the real term. So if we lose observability, by that I mean if we don't know what to expect to come in 2 years, 3 years, 8 years, 10 years, now we've lost observability of the long-term planning horizon, and we struggle to be ready to meet that challenge when it arrives. So that is why we are learning to forge better conversations, develop a better collaboration with large loads in order to be better prepared to serve their needs when it's time.
Yes, definitely. So, given where you sit, right, chief growth officer, can you give us an example of a decision you've had to make? It could be around a large loads, that people outside the industry might not understand. And I'm thinking also, um, still thinking about the importance of balancing. You just mentioned the grid is always a balancing act, but we always have to take into account the economics and the reliability, right? The operational reliability.
Sure. So two things come to mind with your question. So the first I would like to mention is around how we organize transactions with the large loads with an eye on the financial security of the other customers interconnected to the grid. So Rappahannock Electric Cooperative is a not-for-profit electric cooperative. 100% of our cost to operate is passed directly to our customers. We do not have a profit margin. So if we bear a cost, it has to be allocated directly to a customer. So we've organized our financial transactions in such a way that large loads are, um, I think the easiest way to put it is paying their way. And we've organized credit arrangements to ensure that if we have an unexpected financial event, just like an operational event on the grid, that the balance of our membership is protected so that there's not a financial problem that the balance of the membership winds up having to pay for. We don't wind up holding a bill that someone else should have paid and asking the balance of the membership to pay that. So that's a hard line that we've drawn, and so sometimes conversations with large loads that can be a difficult conversation, but it's a reality of our business model that we have to share, explain, and once everyone understands the motivation and why we're organizing transactions the way we are, then we come to a good place. So that's one aspect that I think is sometimes not an easy conversation, but it's necessary, and we think a requirement in order to be able to serve in a responsible way. The other thing that comes to mind, I mentioned changing loads in the data center arena, working with data center customers to understand um, how we should expect their load to behave, asking for the finding a balance between, hey, the power system engineers want to understand and model to the nth degree, but we have an uncertainty in terms of what the load is going to look like, and trying to get those two worlds to meet with a collaboration that I'll characterize as good enough in order to um, form a basis for a contract and a transaction that we can feel good about and march forward, and then have an agreement that we're going to work together to optimize over time. It's difficult. It requires a certain amount of trust and a bilateral collaboration in order to say, hey, we're here. It may not be an optimized solution. It may cost more than we would like, but we know it will work, and we're going to agree to work together over time to optimize uh, for the good of both sides of this agreement. So those are complicated conversations, and the sort that are relatively new, and both sides of the conversation are having to come to the table in a collaborative way that we've never had to do before. But it's exciting, and the result of those conversations is compelling. It's very innovative, and I think the industry is better for it.
Definitely. And I believe Rappahannock Electric was one of the first examples in the first part of your answer that you mentioned, working with the data centers to protect the cost of the members, right? I believe that model was one of the first ones we saw in the industry. And I was curious as to, I think it set an important, it was an important setting the tone, right, for what is important to protect that affordability. And I was curious as to the sustainability of those models, right? How might they evolve in the future?
That's that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. We formed a subsidiary. It's called Hyperscale Energy Services. that itself has a number of subsidiary organizations imagined. That subsidiary is running today. It is serving hyperscale data center load. It was designed with specifically an eye on managing financial risk to the balance of the legacy membership of the cooperative. So we've been serving load in Virginia for many, many decades. I think about 90 years now. So to think that we are going to grow in scale in magnitudes, the orders of magnitude. So we could be 5 or 6 times the size we were just a year ago or a year or two ago is an enormous lift from a basic power system engineering and operations perspective. But from a financial perspective, it is a gargantuan leap forward, right? So that model was developed in order to feel good organizationally from our board down through our operations team that we have these financial transactions organized in a way that if there is a problem, an unexpected financial event, that the balance of the membership is insulated and would not have an adverse impact from a problem with one of our large loads.
That is fascinating. I had actually not heard about that, so thank you for sharing. And now everything reminds me of the very simple example that you put for the everyday life, right? It reminds me of being able to change that air conditioning, right? Because my
That's
spending a month is not at the limit. So very interesting organization, and we'll definitely follow that. So I think we're getting towards the end of our conversation today. I was going to ask you what keeps you optimistic about the future of our energy system, and maybe what gives you confidence that we are going to be able to adapt to these changes.
it. So I'll say this. I'll answer that question this way, and I'm going to fall back on our industry's long-term competence and fantastic track record of seeing a problem, seeing new load opportunities, and bringing to bear a way to serve that load. Uh, this is not an unprecedented thing in our industry. Many years ago, there was a massive electrification effort in homes and businesses to do things like implement air conditioning. We think of air conditioning now, especially in the Southeast, as a given. But if you go back 60 or 70 years, it was a luxury afforded just a handful. So now we think about our load shape and summer peaking systems. It's all driven by air conditioning. So that's a load that didn't exist if we go back 60 or 70 years ago in a meaningful way. So we talk about electric vehicles, electrification of the transportation system is happening. The pace at which it's going to happen is debatable, but it's happening. It's going to grow, and the grid is going to be a critical part of that. We've been thinking about that for many years. We're going to meet this. We're going to meet this need as well. The market dynamics that are in place that allow capital to recognize an opportunity, deploy to solve a problem, and once we are able to connect capital in the marketplace with those who need a solution, then this is all going to come together. It's a natural migration for our industry. It's a natural migration for capital coming to bear to solve big problems. It's all starting to come together. I think over the next few years, we're going to start talking about new innovative solutions, whether it's in supply, power delivery solutions, and we'll have a whole new set of conversations to record and talk about as we see those solutions in place and begin scaling them to solve these big problems.
I love that, Herschel. And I think you said it very well, right? The change is certain. It is just uncertain as to how, when, where. And that's going to be our biggest challenge, right? I think as an
Absolutely.
industry and engineers and, in partnership, of course, always with the financing world and the technology to be able to adapt to that uncertainty. But it is very exciting. I love your closing. And thank you so much for the conversation, Herschel.
You're welcome. I would love to chat with you anytime.
Excellent. And thank you to our listeners for listening. The Switch is produced by Electric Power Engineers, and we are turning the switch off until next time.
Thank you for listening. For more episodes, you can find The Switch wherever you watch or listen to podcasts. For more information, follow Electric Power Engineers on LinkedIn or visit our website.